So we continue our program, and that presentation is really a segue into the next presentation. We have our next speaker is Miss Shirell James, and she is from a technology company called One Network Enterprises. And it's interesting to see now another perspective from a technology provider versus a technology regulator. If I can just introduce Ms. Shirell James. Shirell has 25 years of experience in technology and supply chain, has been at the forefront of supply chain technology for quite a while. Today, she will be explaining the challenges facing today's supply chains and how intelligent control towers can help us manage uncertainty and maximize service levels without increasing inventory, and ultimately have a positive impact on our company's P&L. And as I asked the previous speaker, how do you know when you have the right technology, Shirell? And I hope that maybe you can answer that question for us, and I'm sure you can. So Shirell, welcome to the conference. Thank you for making the time. I know you're calling out of Europe. It's very early for you. I appreciate you being with us. So in your hands, take it away.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you to everybody for attending today. Let me just share my screen. So so as Joe mentioned, I'm going to talk today about some of the challenges facing supply chain today, and a lot of these you will already know, and then how intelligent control towers can help you solve some of those challenges. So, 2020 was an interesting year, not just because of COVID, but we had lots of other issues in supply chains. Obviously, Brexit changed the dynamic between the UK and the EU, and ongoing issues around customs processing there. We saw the Evergreen getting stuck in the Suez Canal, having a big impact on shipping, and then obviously COVID. And what COVID did was really brought supply chain to the forefront. Before COVID, nobody who didn't work in supply chain really knew what supply chain was. But now everybody understands what a supply chain is and how that can impact our day-to-day lives. That disruption is continuing. So in this year, we've seen things around a lot of issues around transportation. Transportation capacities, ships, vessels getting caught in ports, not able to dock in the port, not able to unload. Obviously, with Brexit, there's been big disruption around how product moves, especially between Ireland and the UK. We see a lot of issues in supply, the big one being the chip shortages. So the chip shortages has really impacted the automotive and the high-tech industries. All the reports are saying this is not going to change. So these disruptions are going to continue into 2022 and beyond. There was an interesting report in Material Handling and Logistics, and actually it showed that in the last year, supply chain disruption has increased by 67%, and that was excluding COVID. And so we're seeing a lot of, you see demand changing. So demand is going up across the board, but production is not increasing to match that. And then we hear a lot of stories about workforce availability. So, as a result of COVID, people have kind of changed how they're working, and workforce availability is down. These disruptions are made more complicated because many companies outsource at least one or more core functions of the supply chain. So if you think about how supply chain progressed through the 80s, 90s, noughties to today, there was a big shift from companies doing their own manufacturing, running their own logistics, to all of that being outsourced. So when these supply chain disruptions happen, they typically happen outside your sphere of influence. So when, this example here, if there's a factory in a fire in a factory in Japan, that may not be something you're directly in control of, and even your suppliers may not be directly in control of. So the whole supply chain disruption becomes more complicated to manage because of the amount of outsourcing. And then 100% of all companies are dependent on another provider, and that is typically in logistics. So most companies outsource at least some portions of the logistics to external providers, obviously ocean freight being a good example of that, air freight, and even domestic road freight, all the freight forwarding. So, you know, when you look at supply chains today, they're very, very complex. They're very heavily outsourced, and we're seeing those disruptions increase significantly, and that trend is going to continue. So what we are seeing is a lot of interest in intelligent control towers, and I will explain what I mean by an intelligent control tower today, with the goal of being able to predict and resolve issues in real time. Now, the last point in that previous presentation was really interesting, which is when you're looking at technology, you need to understand why. And this is something we're really focusing on as a company when we talk to supply chain organizations, is why. Don't just buy a control tower for the sake of buying a control tower, but really look at what is the problem that you're trying to solve, because the problem that you're trying to solve will determine what direction you go in from a technology perspective. And these are some of the things that we hear a lot across all industries. So you can see things like, my old channels are gone. This has been a huge change in the last year, where, you know, manufacturers would sell their product through traditional retail channels. That has completely changed. So there's been a huge shift to the e-commerce market. As a result of that, it's really difficult to forecast the future. So if your forecasting is based on what happens in the last 3 years, that is not going to be helpful for planning your sales for the next 12 months. So there's a big kind of shift in demand, consumer buying habits, that makes it very difficult for companies to forecast what they actually need to manufacture. On the opposite side, supply is shifting. So you have a lot of supply disruption issues, the chips being one of them, but it's cross-industry, there are supply issues. Some of that is related to transportation. So obviously transportation is a source of supply. We always say, treat your transportation as an in-transit warehouse. That inventory is valuable to you. But when your product is stuck in transit and you don't know where it is, it's very difficult for you to then understand what the impact is on the supply chain. So what I'm going to explain to you today is what is an intelligent control tower, why insights from visibility must be actionable and based on execution data. So this is really important, and I'll talk about that. The importance of AI to generate a real-time response. So speed is really critical in today's environment, and why supply chains must work together in today's global economy. And I think the previous speaker kind of touched on this as well at the end there, talking about it's not competition, but it's all about collaboration. So rather than treating, you know, think about, okay, a chip shortage. If there is a chip shortage, that doesn't affect only you, it affects everyone else within that supply chain. And when supply chains start to kind of fall apart, if someone goes out of business or certain things don't function correctly, you know, it's really going to affect everyone. So I think in the future, we're going to see a lot more collaboration within industries, within industry supply chains. And then finally, the value. So that's a really critical point. Whenever you're looking at technology, and especially control towers, is looking at how that drives balance sheet and P&L improvements. So I'm going to touch on that as well. Okay, so control towers. So the basic control tower is visibility and alerting. And so that's what we've seen many companies be doing for the last 5 roughly years. So getting visibility within my enterprise or slightly extended outside my enterprise, and then having alerts to tell me when things are going wrong. So this could be a data warehouse, it could be a data lake with a BI reporting tool that's giving you that visibility and some alerting capabilities. And then we see some advanced techniques applied on these control towers, like applying AI for decision support and running some processes autonomously. What I want to talk today about is intelligent control towers. So control towers, while they're useful, I think for today's world where we're experiencing a lot of supply chain disruption, the control towers need to do a little bit more. So the first thing here is visibility should be across the entire end-to-end network. And I'll come on to that later, why that's really important. They should allow you to collaborate in real time with your partners, but most importantly, they should be actionable. So if you're gathering data and if you're getting alerts on things or exceptions on things that are going wrong, you should be able to action the response. A great example of that would be I have a production order that's late, and that production order is needed for a particular promotion that I have running somewhere in the world. The initial response to that is expedite the freight, but it may not make sense to expedite freight. You may have other options for fulfilling the demand, or you may not even be able to execute that expedite. So making sure everything is actionable. And then within the decision support, again, having it operate across the end-to-end network. If you think about the disruptions there are today, that don't necessarily happen within your enterprise. They happen outside your enterprise and even beyond that. So your decision support should be looking at the entire network. So when something is going wrong, what does that mean for my entire supply chain? So what is the best way to solve that problem? And making it real time and prescriptive. So using that data in real time and providing this prescriptive analytics help the users really make rapid decisions, make the best decisions. So what's the best decision for the business? So if we talk about actionability, and this is the thing about making the best decision for the business. So if you look at the types of disruptions, supply shortages can be at any tier of supply. It can be transportation, recalls, the product life cycle. This is actually a really interesting one. So in a lot of industries now, the product life cycle has completely changed. The biggest one being pharmaceutical, where pharmaceutical was very static before. Their product life cycle, we see with the vaccines and all the pharmaceutical products required for COVID, their product life cycle has completely changed. Service disruptions, so transportation disruptions, and then the impact of COVID on consumer buying patterns, for example. So when you're analyzing, you've got all that data coming in and you've got alerts telling you things are going wrong. I've got a container stuck in transit. I've got a supplier who's not able to deliver the materials that I need for production. I've got a demand surge and I'm stocking out of inventory. So what is really important is, first of all, you understand the impact. So what impact does that disruption have on the business? Because it may not. So if something is late in transit, demand may have changed, and actually that container may no longer be important. So understanding the impact those disruptions have in terms of, am I going to fail on service levels? Am I going to have a revenue impact? Am I going to have a stock out? Or am I going to have an overstock even? Overstocks are as bad as stock out. Helping the planners prioritize. So out of everything that's happening across my supply chain, which are the ones that I should really focus on to maximize revenue and minimize cost? Then coming back to that point of making sure they are executable. So what are the options for resolution? So there can be multiple options, but making sure that is executable. The great example being expedite freight. If someone makes a decision to expedite freight, can I then process that through the other side? Can I get it through customs? Can I get it through the warehouse? Can I get it out onto transportation, get it where it needs to be? Because if I'm going to spend the money on expedite freight, I want to make sure that it actually gets there. And then being able to action that in real time. So passing that information off to the systems that need to be able to action that response. So using an intelligent control tower, so it will allow you to, first of all, anticipate disruptions, but then generate actionable responses in real time to maximize revenue and minimize costs. So that's the first thing, actionability. Second thing, speed. Supply chain directly impacts the profit P&L. I mean, you see so many companies where their stock prices being impacted because of supply chain issues. If you're holding too much inventory, if your revenue has dropped because product wasn't on the shelf, if you've lost market share, so supply chain does have a direct impact on the P&L. So because of that, it's really important that you're making the decisions quickly, but you're also making the correct decisions. So I'm making the correct decisions to make sure I've got product availability to meet service levels, that I'm running my supply chain with optimal operating costs. So rather than firefighting, so having huge headcount, managing disruptions, How do I automate some of that process so that my headcount can focus on more strategic things? Expedited freight. Do I need to pay for that expedite freight? And then making sure your working capital is optimized. So even while we're seeing increasing variability, how do you kind of flatten out that noise and still keep your working capital down and keep your service levels up? And so that's with real-time data, assessing what's going on, and making sure that you're responding quickly to the disruptions that are occurring. The end-to-end network. So again, this is a really important part of control tower. When you're looking at control towers, it's important to look at where the disruptions are occurring and what is causing them. So quite often we'll ask companies who come to speak to us, oh, we need a control tower. We need a control tower for visibility. So the first question is always, what's the KPI you're trying to improve? It's OTIF. So quite often the KPI will be OTIF or service level. But then the next question is, what's causing that? Many companies don't know. So it's quite hard to know what's causing the product not to arrive in your warehouse so you can meet service levels. And some companies will know. My OTIF is poor because my demand variability, I'm not getting the supply I need, I have transportation issues. So it's really important to understand what is causing the issue. And typically the issue is caused outside your sphere of influence. So what we recommend is that when you look at control towers, you're looking at how you can eventually get that end-to-end visibility. That may not be there in the beginning, but you need to have a path or a journey that takes you towards that so that you can start capturing data from those external parts of the supply chain and start using that to really optimize what's happening within your business. Okay, so just a word about One Network. So what we do is we provide intelligent control towers. So it is a multi-party network. And we're providing that real-time single version of the truth. The single version of the truth is very important in the story of the intelligent control tower as well, so that everyone's looking at the same information. So it's not just you looking at one thing within your data lake and your partner's looking at something else in theirs, but that everyone is looking at that same information. So same orders, same shipments, same, you can even talk about serialized products and assets. Demand, supply, production, and logistics. So I think this is very important as well. Quite often companies will focus on one. I need a logistics control tower. I need to solve my demand problems, but they really are all connected. So it's important that when you're looking at control towers, you look at, can I capture demand information? Can I capture supply? Can I incorporate production? And can I pull the logistics processes into it to get a full end-to-end view? Again, actionable and executable. So we talked about that. It's really important. If you're going to invest money in a control tower, you have to make sure that whatever that control tower is providing is actionable and executable. AI driven and global demand supply match. So for me, the key to this is inventory. If you're talking about logistics, at the end of the day, it's inventory. And so if you're able to capture all this information, demand, supply, production, and logistics, you're able to then balance your inventory. So if you're able to balance your inventory across the network and then use AI to determine when I've got overstock, understock, projected stock out, that's going to really help you manage the disruptions in a way that's going to benefit the P&L. And then the multi-tier supply chain ecosystem. So I'm going to come on to that in the last minute of my presentation. So I've got 5 minutes left before we head into Q&A. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about supply chain ecosystems. So this is the part about the ecosystem collaborating rather than each company competing within that. So these are 7 key takeaways for successful control tower implementations. So this is something that we firmly believe in at One Network, and we'd be happy to talk to anyone who's participating today about this. So start with visibility. Like I said, quite often when we ask companies, okay, you want to improve on time and full, why? What's the cause for that on time and full failure? It's often unknown. So you can't act on what you can't see. So the first step is getting that visibility and really understanding what the disruptions are and what's causing them. Once you know what they are, is then getting those insights that are actionable. So making sure that when you're capturing all that information, that what the solution that you're selecting can actually action a response. Value is critical, so always look at the value. So what are the KPIs that I'm trying to improve? Why are those KPIs not where they should be? What are the problems that I'm trying to solve? And come up with a roadmap, a value roadmap of your transformation. So what are the key KPIs that I want to improve as I go through this control tower or digital transformation? Forecast accuracy. It's a really interesting topic at the moment. I think we saw 10 years of companies constantly improving their forecast, and the last year has shown that it's, when consumer patterns change the way they have, it becomes really difficult to forecast. Obviously, the forecast is important from a sales and operations perspective and for future planning, but within the short term, you really need a more rapid response to demand variability than trying to adjust your forecast. Speed wins every time. So those that act first win at the shelf. So if you're a manufacturer and your products aren't getting to the shelf or getting to the consumer, they're going to buy another consumer's product. So you really want to make sure you're responding quickly to the disruptions and that you're gaining that market share. And then your supply chain is not distinct from others. So I've said this, I've mentioned a few times today. So a single disruption somewhere in the supply chain doesn't just affect you, it affects other companies within that supply chain. So this is where I think we're going to start seeing some convergence of industries. If you look at automotive and high tech at the moment, they're both affected by that semiconductor problem. So I think what we'll see is these industries starting to kind of pool their resources to try and make sure that they get the materials that they need for their particular industry. In terms of deploying it, we always recommend step 1, build your foundation of visibility. Step 2, build that structure of actionability and executable processes. And then step 3 would be finished with the network-based optimizations. The network optimization here doesn't mean where are my DCs, but where do I position my inventory in the network? What's my correct safety stock levels based on the latest demand and supply information? How do I respond to things that are happening in real time and making sure that I've got the right product in the right place at the right time to keep or improve my market share. Okay, just wrapping up, this is a checklist. So this is a checklist that you can actually download from our website. And it's just the things that we believe that you really need to look at when you're assessing control tower solutions. So it should be a hub-to-hub model. So it should allow you to create that multi-enterprise control tower, maybe not today, but in the future, give you that roadmap to a multi-enterprise. It should be a real-time single version of the truth. This is one to really dig into. Is the control tower really providing a single version of the truth, or is it a series of transactions that are kind of sitting in different databases that there's a visibility layer that sits on top? Because if it's not a single version of the truth, not going to allow you to respond in real time. It's not going to give you the speed and agility. Is it scalable? Supply chains are huge today. You think about all the partners that are collaborating in a typical supply chain. It's very large today. End-to-end visibility. Can we use the execution data to use AI to come up with the prescriptive analytics? Is the decision making in real time? Does it enable autonomous supply chain management in the future? Can it balance the inventory? Again, for me, logistics is inventory. When you've got something on the water, it's moving your inventory. So what you should always be looking at the control tower from an inventory perspective, ultimately. So, even if you're talking about logistics, from an inventory perspective and how you can balance your inventory across the network using the data that you're gathering from the logistics processes. and can you generate the value quickly so that you start to really drive value for the business using the control tower. One thing I just want to touch on at the end here is this the industry topic. So this is where I think we'll start to see companies move towards, so the kind of industries working together to solve the challenges that are impacting that industry. So if that is a semiconductor problem, automotive will start to compete with high tech. And so those automotive companies will come together, high tech companies will come together to try and solve that problem within their industry. We at One Network, we run industry networks. So that is something that's very different about what we do compared to other control tower solutions. So we run industry networks. So within the automotive industry network, we have automotive OEMs, suppliers, tier 1, tier 2, however many tiers, logistics providers. So everything for that automotive industry sits within that network. So if there is a tier 2 problem, that is reflected to everyone who's connected to that tier 2 through that network. The same applies for the other ones. You can download this information from our website. So recognize the leadership with Gartner, Nucleus Research, IDC, some resources that you can download from our website as well. So you can just go to our website. There's a resources page. There's some information on our site around control towers. And that's it. So that's my presentation for today. So I'll hand back over to Joe.
Thank you very much, Shirell. This is actually an excellent presentation. Could you revert back to page, I think, 13, where you had the 7 summary points, which is really, I wanted to actually just elaborate on that a bit further, because you really make a very complex subject, 13, yeah? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So you make this very complex subject look so simple. But I got 2 burning questions for you, which basically I come across and people ask me in my transformation work. You know, this transition between legacy to the new solutions, it's a big problem for many companies. They've made wrong choices, they've invested in the wrong infrastructure, and now they've got this huge depreciation to pay for, and yet we tell them you've got to move to the next phase. How do you get your head around this, Shirell? How do you actually help people to say, look, you've really got to let go, even though you've spent the money, you've got to let go because there is enough time to transition to a new system. How do you go about that?
No, that's a really, really interesting topic. I think, and there's 2 aspects to that. So one aspect is the actual implementation roadmap itself, and the other aspect of that is more kind of philosophical. There's the whole, I think there's a book on, I can't remember the full title, but Unthinking. And so we're, you know, at One Network, we're trying to help companies unthink what went before. So one thing to unthink is silo-based vertical planning and how you can get to the end-to-end network model. So there's a whole philosophical thing around unthinking how everything worked before. The second thing is the journey. So the journey. So we actually will say to companies, you don't necessarily need to throw away what you have. If you've invested in legacy technology, we can initially wrap around it. So we can sit on top of it, we can wrap around it, we can wrap around your partner's technology, we can provide that visibility, and then you can start using those insights to determine what's causing my value problems. And then from that, determine which of those you need to replace. And so if we're generating value through wrapping around what's there and we're increasing revenue, reducing inventory, that can then be used to replace those legacy systems once you identify what the legacy systems are that need to be replaced. And so that's why we kind of talk through these 3 steps. So don't try and get to that network optimization day 1, but really understand what's going on by building that foundation of visibility first and then getting that information on what's causing it.
Shirell, is there a relation between cost of getting rid of your legacy systems and the loss of value in migrating to the new systems? How do you correlate? Because the CFO of any company says, no, you spent $2 billion or whatever you spent on that, you've got to utilize that before you spend more. But the cost of not doing something means the loss of value somewhere else. How do you then balance these 2 issues?
Yeah, so this is where we can help with things like value roadmap calculations. So what's the cost of not acting?
Right.
So if you were to do something, what would the value be? And for every month that you don't act, what's the cost to the business? And then what's the cost of replacing the technology that you already have, and then build a business case for it. So yeah, there is definitely a cost of not acting.
Excellent. If you can share with us later on sometime in the future, that'd be great. The other burning question as well is, again, when you talk about visibility, it's about this global demand, the supply match. And this is where everybody gets stuck in terms of, you show the chart earlier on about goods in transit, then priorities change, and so over what time horizon and what levels does this work? And can you give an example of how we overcome this issue?
The time horizon, that's a great question. So time horizon is really going to depend, I think it's probably on your lead times. So it doesn't need to be far out in the future. So what global demand supply match is not doing like sales and operation planning for the future, right. But it's looking at the now. So what's happening now or in the next 6 weeks or whatever the lead times are. I would say it's based on lead times. But what it's going to do is help you identify. So if you think when you're capturing all this information from across the network, you've got all these alerts going off telling you this is late, that's right. Short shift. How do you kind of navigate through all of that data to understand which are the ones that are important to look at? And really, it does all come down to inventory. So if I'm stocked out or projected to stock out, it's because I've got a demand profile that means I'm not going to have enough inventory to meet demand. If I'm overstocked, then I maybe don't need to worry about a container that's late. So that's what global demand supply match does. So it kind of has these checks and balances on inventory at each location to determine whether you need to act on a disruption. The other thing it does is what if. So you kind of get these options of these are the different prescriptions. I can then click on them and have a look and see what that does to my inventory profile, balancing service versus cost versus inventory. So yeah, I mean, that's a whole subject on its own, how you can do all of that inventory balancing.
Sure. I've got a question from the audience here. And again, it comes down to size of organization. The question is, how effective, different and efficient is this transformation for small organizations compared to big or market-leading organizations? So here's a question of critical balance between small, large, and application of such a system, such a control tower.
Yeah, so I think that will come down to the value, first of all, the why and the value. So if the problem is big enough to act on, it doesn't matter whether you're a small company or a large company. You're going to get value from it. So, you know, we have companies that range from small, very, small manufacturers, small logistic providers, up to the big Fortune 100 companies. So it really is a question of the what, the why, and the value that you're going to get from it.
Okay, we have only time for one more question, Shirell, because we really have gone over time, but I really want to ask this question about autonomous supply chains. Some people love it and some people are scared. But what does autonomous supply chains look like? I realize not everything is fully autonomous, but what are your customers doing that is leveraging this level of functionality to achieve a certain amount of autonomous supply chains?
Great question. So our recommendation is to really start with that level 3 decision support. So using AI as a way to enable the planners to make better decisions rather than to replace them, because the planners have got a lot of knowledge that they can use in solving the problem. Autonomous supply chain will come in for the more day-to-day things. So an example of that would be detecting a demand shift and then running forecasting algorithms to see what the impact of that is, and then presenting that to a planner to look at. So the autonomous is running engines in the background rather than running the whole supply chain autonomously on its own. I think the planners are critical to the supply chain operation.
Great. Shirell, we're out of time, but thank you so much for a fascinating presentation, an excellent discussion, and thank you again for your time, for being with us today, and wish you all the best in the next coming months and weeks, and hopefully COVID will help us maybe to meet face to face next time.
I know.
Thank you very much.
Hopefully next year. Thank you, Joe.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much. All the
Bye.
best. Thank you. Bye-bye for now.